Hi, so Game Informer has released basically this making of Dragon Age Veilguard documentary, kind of, and I wanted to go over it. Now, it does include a lot of information that was, included beforehand with the other Game Informer articles. Not everything, but it does have a lot of it, and I wanted to give like sort of my thoughts on the sort of general news and whatnot for Veilguard and what I think about it. And also, I wanted to explain what some of the developers might say, because some people may take what they say in the wrong direction, so I just wanted to explain that, and especially some of the things that Mark Dara says, because obviously it lacks a bit of the context that his videos give. His videos have a lot more, since it's, its own thing, gives a lot more context to what he's saying and why he's saying that, right? There are some things in here which does make it a bit weird, on like, so what do you mean by that exactly? I think one of the things that he says is that for Dragon Age Veilguard, it feels like you're going somewhere, or with Dragon Age Origins, it doesn't feel like you're going like anywhere. It feels like you're just doing things, which when we get to that point, I'll explain like I think what I think he meant to say, because this is just like a quick, here's what the developer's saying, quick snappy kind of thing, I also just want to like just be a bit happy about it, because like a lot of the information that they're talking about, Veilguard, is just like really cool, and also I just want to speculate about some of the story decisions that they're going to go with. So yeah, I'm not going to be pausing too much, but I'll only be pausing on like stuff I think is very relevant. As for tomb time speed, I'm not going to do tomb time speed unless I feel like, okay, this feels like it's taking a bit too long, and then I'll 2 times speed it. So yeah, let's get on with it.
Dragon Age Origins came out. Playing that game, day one purchase. I love RPGs, and I'd never played anything like it. To be honest, it kind of blew my mind. It really felt like a step forward for the genre, and I fell in love with the characters. I fell in love with the presentation, had all the strategy I was looking for. I was in awe of that game, and to sit here now working on the next edition of Dragon Age, it's a dream come true.
I owe my career to Dragon Age. I've grown as a person and grown as a game developer with it, and I'm so excited to finally be able to talk about Veilguard especially.
This is really the best Dragon Age game that I've ever played. I obviously carry some bias because I'm coming into it partially from the outside, but yeah, this is the best one. This is the one where we get back to our roots of character-driven.
And I think one thing just to point out is that the developers we've seen, like Mark Dara, John Epler, and Corny Bush, I'm sorry if I can't pronounce her name correctly, is that they're clearly like very happy and like passionate about Dragon Age, which I think is like very important to front for a lot of people, because it doesn't necessarily matter if someone sounds like dispassionate, because like sometimes people just sound like that, that's just how they are. But it's nice to see that like very overt, like, hey, these guys are like really happy about it, and they think this game is going to be really good and enjoyable,
Storytelling, have really fun combat, and aren't making compromises.
Every game has heart and soul that goes into it. But this is something different. This is something more.
Kind of creative and coming up on 17 director for Dragon Age the Veilguard. Been at Bioware for coming up on 17 years this year. I pulled together the story, the vision, the kind of creative intent of not just the game, but how it relates to Dragon Age as a whole, the storytelling we're doing, and all that sort of thing.
My name's Corinne Bush. I'm the game director on Dragon Age the Veilguard. I joined Bioware just shortly after Anthem had launched, and fortunately the opportunity came along to join my dream franchise, Dragon Age.
I'm Mark Dara. I am the former executive producer for the Dragon Age franchise. I was executive producer on Dragon Age Origins, Dragon Age.
Man, dude, just look how young he is, dude. Like, they didn't have to do him like this, okay? They didn't have to like, okay, yeah, let's do a black and white to just indicate how old he is. Okay?
I was executive producer on Dragon Age Origins, Dragon Age 2, and Dragon Age Inquisition.
One of the things we wanted to make sure with Veilguard is that it's respectful and referential to previous games without feeling like you needed to have played Inquisition or DA2 or DO to understand what's going on. So while there are references, there are moments that we have callbacks.
I think that's like a very big point for like Dragon Age, which is Dragon Age has always been like they've always been connected in some degree, right? Especially like Dragon Age 2 to Inquisition to Veilguard, they're like connected to a degree, like Dragon Age Veilguard isn't really too connected to Dragon Age 2, because the Mage Templar conflict isn't really a thing that it's about. But each Dragon Age game, compared to like Bioware's other franchise, Mass Effect, has always been like very isolated with each other, which I think is something I think that should stay like the identity of the Dragon Age series, which is they're telling like a different story with different characters, with different themes and whatnot, right? Like set into the Dragon Age, setting, which is just like better overall, I think, because it means that there's a lot, because with Mass Effect, right? Mass Effect is like a setting of its own, and it can have stories that are of its own, right? Aside from Shepard, but Shepard is so like tightly, part of the identity of Mass Effect, right? He's on, and well, they are on the cover of each game, and the first thing you ever really see and hear about is Shepard. The story of Mass Effect is also in part the story of Shepard, right? And so I think for Veilguard, it's nice that they like talk about that, like, hey, each of their own games, and we want to make sure that you feel like you can get into this even if you're a new player and whatnot. I think that's very important.
Its own story, its own continuation with a different cast, with different characters. Historically, Dragon Age has always had a different cast per game, so that gives us a lot of freedom in terms of what we want to lean on in the past and what we want to really bring in that's new and forward-facing.
The thing that happened in 2023 that I love is that it blew the doors open in terms of what a storytelling RPG could be, where you had Baldur's Gate 3 and you had Zelda and you had all of these games, Starfield, come out in the same year and say, this is a storytelling RPG. They're very different from each other. You can like some of these, you can like all of these, but the genre can be bigger. We're learning on each other, we're building foundations that we can build upon, so I think there are going to be a lot of people who picked up their first RPG last year that are going to be looking to pick up something new and could really find something to love.
Now, I think this is very interesting that like Mark Darrah, like, it's because developers don't necessarily, like, when they're talking about their own game, mention like similar games, right? They may mention games that are like if the interviewer says like, hey, what about X game? Have you taken inspiration with X game? Like when a lot of RPGs started to become open world, a lot of people, I think, like rightly asked like, hey, so you took inspiration from Bethesda and like Skyrim and stuff, but they never do it like by themselves, right? They'll maybe reference their own year games. But like they never mention, which is interesting that he mentioned like Baldur's Gate 3, Starfield, other one, oh, Legend of Zelda, yeah. And it's interesting that he did that, because like I think that is very like important, because like think back, I think, on the most like popular and hyped RPG, right, that you could think of in the past few 5 years, right? Like, so that would be like what, 2019? Like from 2019 to like now, what was a big RPG? There was obviously Baldur's Gate, but like I can't really think of one that was so like culturally mainstream in the video game industry, where it was recognized and thought of as like this huge new standard or this very big success or whatever. So I think like it's an interesting point he makes of, hey, RPG are like in vogue again, and so a lot of people are going to be looking out for those, right? Because many people did have their first RPG last year, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how Dragon Age Veilguard is going to address that, especially with how, on the surface level similar Baldur's Gate 3 and like the Dragon Age series is, I think it's just an interesting thing to point out, especially because like then this is also insight, because game developers don't necessarily talk about what they're playing, right? Though they do play games. John Epler and Corny Bush have mentioned in the past they've played Elden Ring, right? Which is like a very interesting thing, and I think definitely is some influences with Veilguard, right? I think it's like, I guess Elden Ring would be like a very big RPG, though I'm not sure it wouldn't be an RPG in like a narrative sense.
Hey, Shadows. Hope I'm not interrupting.
Dude, looks so good, dude. Oh.
Let's buy some time.
Now, I want to be clear, I adore Solus. I'm a Solo Valen player, but this is not a game about Solus. So in all things we do, trying to capture that authentic experience, we thought the title really
the allegations
to change.
Dreadwolf suggests a title focused on a specific individual, whereas Veilguard, much like Inquisition, focuses more on the team, focuses more on the group, focuses more on the party than it does on one specific person.
The absolute beating heart of this game are these authentic, diverse companions. And when we took a step back, as we always do, we always check our decisions and make sure that they still represent the game we're trying to build. It just felt like we needed a title that represented what this game was truly about.
I think it was absolutely the right choice. Names can take on a momentum. Arguably, this game has kind of, in a way, been called Dreadwolf since its earlier days. And as the game evolved, as the game figured out exactly what it was, it's very mature.
Now, I do think that's like a very like good point to make, because like a lot of people will say like Dreadwolf is like a cool, and it is, right? Like Dreadwolf invokes a lot more like, man, this is like a cool fantasy idea, right? You have like especially with the imagery with Solus as like a giant wolf, right? As like a demonic wolf, it looks cool, it feels cool, right? And it gives like a very solid identity, right? Though the Veilguard is just like more accurate, and I think making the game more accurate to what it is far more important than just like a cool name, right? Dragon Age 2 suffered, I think, a lot because it was called Dragon Age 2, right? If it was called Exodus, sure, maybe that isn't what a lot of people would have wanted, right? They would have wanted something that's like a sequel to, you know, Origins or whatnot, but it would have been more accurate to what the game actually is. And I think that's like very important, you know, to just like have that idea that, hey, this is, you know, the game is about like these characters and the Veilguard and protecting the Veil and like whatnot. And I think that's like more important than just having like, oh yeah, I mean, cool name, right? Or like name that does successfully. Because like, there were like, the reason why Dragon Age 2 was called Dragon Age 2 was because EA internally thought like, hey, games that are like numbered, right, sequels, right, that are very direct about it, do well more successfully. Though that like, not that Dragon Age 2 didn't do successfully, but like it does feel misleading, you know.
You step back and say, we called it something, does it really still reflect what the game is? And I think the fact that the team was willing to take that step is amazing, and I think this is absolutely
and I think like Mark Dara is also here very right, because like in development, right? So I think a well-known fact for the Dragon Age community is, you know, the name Thedas is literally just the Dragon Age setting, right? It's just that, which is like, the reason that name won out over anything else is because Bioware has been calling it that for so long. It just like got its own momentum, and now it just doesn't feel right to use any other name other than Thedas, right? Even though it's literally just the Dragon Age setting, right? So it is very, I think, good to choose a name that's a lot more meaningful and a lot more accurate to the actual series. Or to the actual game.
I guess it's the Veil weakening, and they're slipping through the cracks.
I would say one thing that does like maybe bother me, at least with this bit, is like, I guess it does explain like why the demon dogs aren't like attacking our guys, right? But like, I kind of get like a bit of a criticism. Like, yeah.
One of the principles we took to when we were building the story of the Veilguard early on was we wanted the beginning of the game to feel like the final chapter of an earlier story. You know, at the end of Trespasser, Solus said he was going to end the world, tear down the Veil, and so you start the Veilguard having chased Solus to the city of Minrathous in the Defender Empire, there to stop.
Now, I think this is a very interesting like point that they make, which is I think like very emblematic on how like Veilguard feels. It does feel like the end, the last chapter, or like the last few chapters of a book, you know, which is like very clear, because like the obvious idea of what, like, you know, what Dragon Age Inquisition's like the sequel was going to be was, we're going to fight Solus, you know. Solus was going to be the big bad guy, we're going to take him down, you know. Maybe there's going to be like some unforeseen threats that we're going to have to contend with because of Solus, but like generally the trajectory is we're going to fight Solus, you know. And the game's going to start slow, it's going to start us like gathering information, and then like maybe it's going to end with us, you know, like maybe Solus does tear down the Veil, but we're like trying to put it back up or whatever. Like, that was, I think, the sort of idea. I'm not sure how I feel like about it, and I guess because I have a theory, because I have watched this before, so I have an idea on like maybe how Solus is going to be still like very big in like an antagonist sort of way. But I'll get to that when I get to that. But like, I think depending on how they do it, I'll like it or dislike it, right? I think for me, what I would dislike is if, you know, they reduces Solus's like sort of presence too much, right? And additionally, like the threat generally he poses, right? Because I think it's cool to have the idea that Solus has like such a huge spy network, you know, or like a spy network that is going to interrupt our operations and us trying to stop him, you know. I think that's like such a cool idea, and there can be a lot of cool story moments with it, you know. But we'll get to that other thing I mentioned soon enough.
Ritual there to take him down, and so you're working with Varric, you're working with other characters, Scout Harding, Nev, who's the detective. You're there to find this character, so you're chasing him, you're trying to stop this ritual that he's already said multiple times that he's going to perform before he performs it, because if he does, the Veil get torn down, fate and the world of the Waking will merge, and demons will pour out, pretty much meaning the end of life as you know.
And also something they don't mention here is that like Veilguard is set like 10 years after Inquisition, which, as how I feel about it, because like for me, right, when I heard Solus like said like, I'm gonna give you, you know, some time, I assumed it was gonna be like maybe at most 5, but like at least like 2 or 3 years, right? I don't think 10 is like a bad number, you know. Like, it was just unexpected to me. I don't think it's bad that it is like 10 years in the future, though I do think they have to answer a lot of questions, or at least like hint at questions to like what happened to these characters and whatnot, right? because I don't think Solus like taken a lot of time to like giving people some time to like, you know, cope with the reality of like, you know, they're gonna die soon, and also him just taking a long time to prepare his like ritual and stuff. I don't think that's bad, because like, you know, it is obviously up to the writers on like how long they wanted that timeline. Or like my personal preference of like 2-3 years or 5 years doesn't really mean much, because, you know, I just think they would have to do it well, you know, which I think they will.
The thing that is so amazing about Veilguard is this is the game where we finally said out loud that Bioware's greatest strength is telling stories through characters. If you go all the way back to Baldur's Gate 1, Baldur's Gate 2, these are games that are telling stories through characters, but there wasn't an intentionality behind that. And in this game, we're finally putting that intentionality first and foremost, putting the characters first, building the game around those character moments, around those characters, which is really the best way that Bioware knows how to tell stories.
The most interesting villains to myself, and honestly most people...
So, a lot of people do have taken issue with what Mark Darrah has said there, which is like, you know, what do you mean Bioware hasn't hasn't said out loud the idea that like companions and like characters are like very important to their storytelling, you know, which is like weird, because when you play Bioware games, it's very evident that like, you know, it is like that. Now, again, this is a very hard thing to say, because this is more about a cohesion thing rather than like, yeah, I mean, it feels like it's about companions and characters, you know, because what Mark Darrah is trying to say is that, and with a lot of things, right, like vision statements on like games, movies, and stuff like that is very important. It has to be something that's like said throughout the development of those medias, and to basically be like the northern light to guide you, right? It has to always be referred to, and it has to be like when big moments or big things or big changes, you have to ask yourself, how does this fit with the vision, with our style, with our things, right? And Bioware, for a lot of the time, I don't necessarily think have always consistently said, hey, how does this fit, you know, with us telling stories through characters? Because you can see the logical conclusion of that when Bioware hasn't really said it out loud and said it consistently, is Anthem. Anthem, I think, is like better than a lot of people saying, but it is suffering because it doesn't really have companions to help like tell its story, you know? There are cool characters, and Owen's a terrible person. I hate him, the bold fuck, and he should probably die, maybe, you know? And those moments when the characters in Anthem really speak and really do the storytelling are like wonderful. They're fantastic, you know, but it's not all the time. And you can feel a lot of the time that this is just like cool ideas and story and lore, but like there's something missing. It's that Bioware aspect of characters telling the story, you know, and companions being there to like represent factions and whatnot, which there are in Anthem, but like it's not the same, because you're not really developing a relationship with them. You're kind of just like getting impressions, you know, and that I think is what Mark Darrah is referring to, you know. And again, the last game that Bioware has made is Anthem. Anthem was their latest game, their newest release in 2019. And so you can obviously understand, I think, more with the idea of trying to say this, because Anthem is like, was their last game. It's important to say in the public consciousness of saying like, hey, you know, we finally said it out loud that our games are about like telling stories through characters, right? And that I think is very important, especially when the previous game was Anthem, which didn't really have a lot of like those character moments, you know?
People are not just straight up, I just want to end the world. To them, they are the heroes of the story. And Solus is no exception. Solus always feels that he is a tragic hero, but a hero nonetheless. So he's coming into this believing firmly that what you stopped him from doing was the right thing, that you made a mistake. But because now he's trapped, now he can't, you know, reach out and actively fight. He needs to work with you.
I will ask people, because maybe I have a theory on why like they like were able to just like topple the statues, you know? That's a bit too far. Like they were able to topple the statues. And I think that's just because when we first go and see like Solus is like using like magic to put these things in place, you know, I don't think he has like a concrete or something like that. So I think that's why maybe it's easy to topple it over, because like Solus isn't like reinforcing it, you know, which I don't think is bad. Like he's trying to get the ritual done, you know, before like someone stops him, you know, which I guess is an explanation. I wonder if people agree with me or think, you know, like something else, because I do think it is a bit weird that like, oh, they just pushed a beam. I think like an explosive or something like that would have been a lot more acceptable, I guess. Anyways, what he said here I think is very true for Dragon Age, in that like it feels like the motivations for the villains are very understandable in a way. Loghain, I think Loghain is stronger than Corypheus, but like weaker in some aspects. We understand that like Loghain doesn't really like Orlesians, right? But we do mix some context on like well, what was the catalyst for you for your like Elysian hatred, right? And in the book, Dragon Age, the Stone and Throne, we get a lot of examples of like why he really hates Elysians, you know. And in when you have him as a companion, you also get a really good understanding of like why he hates Elysians, you know. And so, but like, anyways, the basic point is that I do think like that is very true, and what made like characters like Loghain like very interesting, you know. And like Meredith and Orsino, like Orsino to a certain extent, and like Corypheus, I think lacks this. He has like I think a very understandable motivation, right? Because like he was a priest, he assumed he was, you know, doing his God's will, but then, you know, it seems like it was a lie or something was happening and he was cursed or whatnot. And so like I understand like that, but I think there should have been a bigger presentation. And so I think like with Solus as well, like it's really cool that they're like saying this and talking about it. And I think Solus is like a very good villain and can probably be like one of Bioware's like better villains in that regard, because, you know, they're focusing on that, and Solus has like a really understandable motivation. Like Trespasser sets it up very nicely, you know.
The right thing, that you made a mistake, but because now he's trapped, now he can't, you know, reach out and actively affect, he needs to work with you, and that allows us to provide a lot of nuance in the relationship, because Solus sees a lot of himself in you, especially the parts of himself that he maybe doesn't like to face. So there is kind of that interesting push and pull between the two characters, Solus and the main protagonist Rook, and you can define what that relationship means. You can continue to be suspicious and hostile towards him, or you can start to see him and find that common ground, find that connection between the two. And
okay, and so now this is one thing that I don't particularly like the idea of Ghost Solus and you just like interact with him like that. So there's two ways. Like there is a way they can do it really well, but this is how I think it's should be done well, right? Or at least like maybe an idea they should keep in mind. Because like I think Solus being a threat is like still like a good idea to have, right? When I first saw those, you know, the other elven gods, right? Let's go back here.
And hostile towards him, or you can start to see him. And
yeah, like the other, like these elven gods, you know. It's like, okay, we have them, they're there, you know, but like I assumed when I saw that, it was like, okay, so this is going to be like a three-way war, right? So these now Solus is now going to have to contend with and use his resources, his network, his, you know, power to try to prevent them from, you know, taking over and whatnot, right? And now these three elven gods are like in deadlock, right? They can't really do anything, and your character now is able to like interact with these, you know, elven gods without just literally getting murked, right? A question I had a lot was, how are we going to deal with Solus when he can literally turn us into a statue, right? He may not do it for Varric, right? Because like there's a relationship, but like our random ass character, he has no real relationship with. Like, why doesn't he just like turn us into stone, right? Like, what is that with? And so I think like having him just take that role of a ghost that's just like on our shoulders is kind of suckish. But there is one way, like a sort of idea that I think would be really cool, which is maybe Solus is actually going to be like the last villain, the last big bad guy that we're going to fight, but it's going to like take until the end of the game, right? Like he is going to be the final bad guy, he's going to be the final threat that we face, you know, but it's going to take a long time, you know. He's biding his time. He can probably revive himself, he can probably like restore himself, but he wants to like use us and help us, and basically like not only that, but know us from the inside out, right? He knows what we're trying to do. He knows like the general gist of our forces, our capabilities, and everything. And then when the time is right, when the other two elven gods are dead, he comes back. He strikes. We're gonna fight him. It's gonna be cool and epic and whatnot. And that's the only way I can think they can really make it interesting. And again, they haven't like spoken too much about it. They've said in other articles like, hey, Solus is going to be like this character that's going to be present throughout, but obviously they're not going to spoil the end of the game, right? Obviously we know we're going to defeat the big bad guy, but not exactly in what way or what might happen along the way, right? So I do wonder if that's going to be an idea. Now, again, this is maybe me setting too many expectations up, and I'm going to set myself up for disappointment, but I do hope something like that's going to happen, you know, because I do want the idea that Solus is like a big bad, even if he's just like among other big bads, you know, as an idea. I like that.
find that common ground, find that connection between the two, and really develop a different relationship over the course of the story.
This is a good direction to take the solo story. It allows us to hopefully give a good conclusion to all of the varied attitudes towards Solus that are going to be coming into this game. People who love Solus, people who agree with Solus, people who hate Solus, people who want to kick Solus off a building. I think that we give you the opportunity to bring that to a close, but then tell a greater story about the Veilguard and about the world as a whole.
Having worked in Inquisition, having worked in Veilguard,
yeah, and what like Mark Dara says, like I hope it does like somewhat mean what I was thinking, you know, theorizing.
We really wanted to lean into early on was Dragon Age has always been about characters, but to some degree it's almost felt like we've lucked into that. Inquisition is a story that ultimately you and the main character you create at the beginning are the ones who have the biggest part to play. We wanted to tell a story this time where you literally cannot save the world without. We've lucked into that. Inquisition is a story that ultimately
about the Veilguard and about the world as a whole.
Having worked in Inquisition, having worked in Veilguard, one of the things that we really wanted to lean into early on was Dragon Age has always been about characters, but to some degree it's almost felt like we've lucked into that. Inquisition is a story that ultimately you and the main character you create at the beginning are the ones who have the biggest part.
Now I do think that's like it's weird to say. So like this does like come with sort of what Mark Dara said about like sort of we never really spoke it out loud, which is again more of a cohesion thing, right? Like I don't necessarily and also he said what it feels like, right? That they feel like that they luck into it, which is not like again them saying like the previous games were like really bad characters or it wasn't really good or whatever, which I think a lot of people may like think that. I think it's more of what they're trying to say is that since we never really said it out loud, since we never like kept referring to that idea of, you know, we tell stories through characters and whatnot, that it basically meant, hey, we kind of, you know, felt that since we said this out loud, we can hone in on aspect and like make that a lot more of a bigger part of it than like previously, because previously we didn't necessarily say it as much, which meant that the companions weren't as like as the best they could be, you know, which I think is what they mean. I don't think it's a dig at the previous games. I don't think like Bioware is like dunking on them or whatever. It's just them, I think, saying that, hey, now that we're actually like using this as a Northern Star, it's going to be a lot better, right?
To play. We wanted to tell a story this time where you literally cannot save the world without these characters. Beyond that, though, we also wanted to give them their own arcs that run parallel to the main story and really give them that kind of deep storytelling that our fans really enjoy and really thrive. So these followers or these companions don't just exist by themselves. They have relationships with each other as well. They have friendships, they have rivalries, and lean into that concept. You're not just pulling together a bunch of people who do whatever you say. You're assembling a family, and that becomes the core of what the Veilguard is all about. It's about taking this group, this found family, and saving the world side by side with them.
This is a story told.
Which I think is very important because like Bioware has always like done that with like inter-companion relationships since the very beginning, but we've never like that's always been like somewhat isolated in banter, right? We've never seen like in Inquisition, we do get to see like, hey, we're playing Wicked Grace. Hey, we see like, you know, we see Iron Bull being hit with a stick with Cassandra, right? And that was like really good because it means the characters are interacting. They're not just like, they're not like talking to us, you know, like we aren't the world to them. Like they have interactions outside of us, right? And I think that's a good idea.
Characters, but it is a story that's going somewhere. In Origins, a lot of things were done just to do them. In Veilguard, things are done towards a goal, towards a storytelling goal, towards the future. So this is a game which takes the ball that Inquisition had, puts its own spin on it, has its own characters, takes its own direction, but continues that path forward into the future.
One of the principles we wanted to get into with Dragon Age.
Okay, so now I think a lot of people can take that way and sort of assume what he's trying to say is like Dragon Age Origins was actually bad and garbage and the worst game ever, which I think a lot of people may sort of take that idea. I don't think like the intentions of what he was trying to say, what he's doing there was saying that, hey, Dragon Age Origins was bad and whatnot. I think, and this is a very hard thing to like sort of grasp by my mind around, but I think the way that he was trying to say, the intention behind it was saying that with Dragon Age Origins, it did somewhat feel like, hey, when you're doing something, you know, it doesn't feel like the goal is always there, right? It's always like present, you know. And I think it's mostly referring to, I think, side quests, because in Dragon Age Origins, there were a lot of times when you're doing like a side quest chain, like with the sort of Black Zone Irregulars, where you kind of just like doing stuff, you know. There was a sort of like arc to that quest line, which was should this mercenary group be about like helping the average day citizens, or should it be about like serving nobility, right? And being like you know, mercs for hire for nobles, right? And that was there. You could tell if you read the text, but it wasn't really present, you know. It did feel like you were just like doing stuff, right? Same with like the, you know, Dragon Age Origins like notice boards, right? Like, hey, you just literally rip something off and do the quest, right? Which again, I think is what he meant to say. It can sound off that he was like saying all of Dragon Age Origins, especially the main quest, which I don't think is very true. I do wonder if he will clarify later on to like, hey, this is I have more time, more space. This isn't just like a 30-minute interview where I can only say a few words. So here is, you know, like what I meant to say, right? So yeah, which I mean, I think is, if what I said is true, I think it's cool that Veilguard is going to try to make side quests and stuff feel like there's like something going towards. Because one of the bigger issues, at least with Dragon Age Inquisition as well, was the fact that the side quests, since they weren't like very cinematic, right? They were just like floaty dialogue cameras. It didn't make it feel as impactful, you know? Even if the quests themselves were fairly interesting, like lacking that like cinematic dialogue you can feel like it's not as good, you know? Even if it's like still fine, it doesn't feel as good. Because that presentation really does matter.
The Veilguard is, the world exists even when you're not around. There are things, there are, you know, ancient conflicts, there are grudges, things that happen even when Rook, the protagonist, isn't participating in them, and you kind of come in media res in some of these. So the message of the Veilguard is you're not saving the world on your own. You need your companions, but you also need these factions, these other groups in the world. You help them, they help you. Now, something we wanted to avoid, because, you know, there's always the trope of, oh yeah, you know, I would help you save the world, but I need you to go gather 200, 200 wood, exactly. It's kind of a silly concept. So what we wanted to build is these factions that do want to help you, but have realistic challenges, problems in front of them. So narratively, you help them with their problems, they will help you with yours when the time comes. But beyond that, each faction has a follower, as well as ancillary character we're calling agents, who exist as these faces of the faction. We're not going to get too deep into those right now, but we didn't want to just say, here's the wardens, go deal with. We wanted to have characters within that faction who are sympathetic, you can see and who become the face of that faction. So even if there's moments where the faction as a whole may be on the outside with you, these characters are still with you, they've still got your back. It's a core of what we've done with the storytelling. We wanted.
I hope that does mean that we get to see like different perspectives from said factions, right? Because what was really cool with like most of the Dragon Age games is that like each faction has its own like each character like sort of represents a different like philosophy of their faction, right? So with the mages, because obviously the mages isn't particularly that, but we do get to see like different perspectives from it when we're doing the mage origin, which is we see like I can't remember the specific names, but they were like the libertarians or something, which are supposed to be like, hey, we want to be, you know, like free from the chantry rule and stuff like that. And then there was the like isolationists who just wanted to be like by themselves, don't really want to interact with the outside world and stuff like that. And then the other ones who were like working alongside the chantry, which is like very cool that we get characters who represent those sort of ideas. Niala, who was the character you get the scroll from that allows you to like resist blood magic and stuff, was part of one of those like you know, factions, essentially. I know there's a specific term, I think it's like a college or something, but like yeah, it was cool to see that, because like, you know, it meant there was a lot more going on, and since we have a character we can ask questions and different perspectives, and it's really cool, you know. So I'm glad that's going to be the case.
And make sure all the content you did felt relevant. Everything you do has a purpose and has a tie back into the critical path. Sometimes it's more explicit than others, but there is always a sense that you're moving towards the goal of stopping the Elven God, stopping the end of the world. And it's not just, you know, and I love Dragon Age Inquisition, but the side content, it's not just finding the ring, someone's ring and returning to them. It's helping these people, helping these groups so they can help you when the time comes.
So when it comes to identity,
yeah, and I think that's very important, because like I think a lot of people who are thinking that like Bioware was like dunking on the previous games kind of ignores the fact that like they're also dunking on one, they're not really dunking on it. It's weird. It's not like out of dislike or think that they were so bad, but like it's clearly that like, hey, we recognize there are some faults with the previous games, and here we're trying to prove it. Like with the Inquisition comment, like, yeah, I mean, I like Inquisition, but like there were some issues with it, right? Which is clearly when he was referring to like the sort of, hey, you need to get this amount. It's like, yeah, maybe he was referring to Inquisition a bit, you know.
And iteration on the franchise, we've really moved it into a place where you have the highest of highs, it can be colorful, it can be optimistic, but also you can have the lowest of lows, where it gets gritty, it gets painful, it gets quite dark. But throughout it all, there's a sense of optimism, and it creates this delightful through line through the game, this identity that I really think is something special for the franchise now and going forward.
I agree.
Should we be in more of a hurry to get out of here? We don't want to look conspicuous. Just get out of here nice and casual. Find Elgalis and stop Solus.
The interesting thing about Dragon Age Veilguard is it takes part in the world of Thedas that we've only hinted at. We've never been there before. The Grey Warden Fortress of Weishaupt, the depths of Arlethan Forest, the Ravane Coast, or even the Grand Necropolis in Navarra. These are storied locations. Let's not forget about Minrathous itself. The great thing about setting the game in these storied locations...
Just look at this, dude. This is so beautiful, man. Like, look at this, dude.
No one has ever seen them before.
It's extremely exciting. It's honestly, when we started building out these spaces, it's just the possibilities were endless. There's a very famous line by Dorian talking about Minrathous in particular. You go to Holmstrel Inquisition, and it's this big, gilded, impressive house. The only place you've been up to this point is either Kirkwall or Ferelden, both, you know, a little bit less impressive. And Dorian looks at this massive structure that's just absolutely enchanting. Castle says, yeah, that's cute. So finding those moments where we've referenced things and thinking to ourselves, what is the best version of this that we can present? And in case,
look at this, dude. Now, oh my gosh, dude, it is so cool.
Minrathous, so cool. What's more spectacular than this massive gilded palace? In the case of Arlethan, what does it look like when you go to the place where the elves had their ancient empire that was run on and fueled by magic? What does the aftermath look like?
I think this is very interesting. I'm not sure if this is like a Bioware decision or this is more of a Game Informer decision, but it's interesting that they reference this one. We now know that like this sort of like,
especially when the gods are in the world and
raw part of the Veil Jumpers. I think it is very interesting that like this Kunari is part of that sort of like faction. You know, I think that's very interesting.
Is seeping back out from the Fade. So one of the things we wanted to get to with the team is really lean on them for their ideas. Like, what excites you about the space? What brings you, a joy and just a thrill to put into the game, and making sure that it fits with the lore. But the great thing about Dragon Age is it's always historically been a series where truth has multiple perspectives. So it just allowed us to build this cohesive space, but also this incredibly colorful, detailed version of each of these spaces we've never been to.
It really is a hub and spoke based design. Your base of operations is the lighthouse. You're going to journey out from the lighthouse into an area of the Fade known as the Crossroads, which is full of mysteries, exploration, branching paths, and you'll take Alluvians to the far corners of northern Thedas. As far as the environments themselves, some of them are more heavily mission focused, which means they're full of narrative beat after narrative beat. And this is one of the constants of our design philosophy is a curated, handcrafted experience. And by creating that sense of handcrafted, narrative-based experience, we really strongly feel it allows us to tell the best stories possible. We know what's going to happen, we know when it's going to happen, but of course it's influenced by all the decisions that you, the player, have made along the way. However, the game does really open up into some of our larger exploration areas. It's not open world, but these are non-linear areas where you can open up new sections of the map, find new pathways, really leaning into solving mystery.
Now, I did mention before that like John Epler and Connie Bush like played Elden Ring, which I'm wondering if that is like the sort of influence that they're coming with, which is like a sort of Dark Souls. We have like a bit of a non-linear area where you can explore like a bit non-linearly, but it's still like, in a sense linear, right? There's still like a direction to it. I wonder if that's going to be in the influence for that. Additionally, I also wonder if it's maybe if some locations are going to be similar to like Dragon Age 2's Kirkwall, where you have like a sort of like location and then you can like branch out, right? There's going to be a lot of ways to like go somewhere. Not go somewhere because Dragon Age Kirkwall wasn't like that, but you get what I mean, which is basically that we're going to have this big like area where we can like go and explore and whatnot, which I wonder how it's going to influence the hub design. Again, like the only Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3 were like and kind of Dragon Age Origins and 2, but like Mass Effect 2 was like this sort of hub design that I think is what most people think about, because you literally went to a planet. There was literally just like a non-combat section, like where you just explore, talk to people, buy stuff, and then you went into the linear missions and just go there. And once you're out of it, you will never go back there again, right? So that is, I think, is what a lot of people refer to. It does sound like it's going to be a bit different. I wonder how exactly it's going to be different, because like they did say that we're going to go to a lot of different places.
Finding ancient treasures, and some of our apex battles. There's some truly terrifying enemies you're going to encounter when you're left to your own means to kind of explore these larger areas.
We've been in the south of Thedas, and South Thedas is for...
Yeah, I wonder what that's going to be. Because like Dragon Age has done like I don't think Mass Effect has done this because it's a very different game. But Dragon Age has always done like these sort of secret bosses. For like Dragon Age Origins, like there's Gaz King, there's another guy, he's in the Kukari Wilds where you sprinkle the ashes. And like the other characters related to Gaz King, there's like a revenant somewhere in the Deep Roads. For Dragon Age 2, it's like a dragon boss. There's also like another demon that you fight. For Inquisition, I don't remember that too much, because like the way Inquisition's like done, it doesn't feel like you kind of like stumble upon a boss. Kind of just like you found a big open area that was a boss arena. It doesn't feel like you stumbled upon it. Yeah, I don't think so. But like, it's interesting to like continue in that. I wonder how story, not story driven, but like how it's going to be written. Because a lot of the times with Dragon Age Origins and 2, it did feel like you kind of just like, oh, okay, so this is like the secret side quest I'm supposed to follow, okay, which doesn't really feel like too story relevant. I wonder how that's going to be different or not.
Ferelden, Orlais, both are still fairly pressed. They still have circles. Mages are viewed with suspicion. But Tevinter has always been this land where mages rule. Mages are in charge. Mages make the rules. Mages run the show. So what does that look like? And as we've gone through, DAO, DA2, Inquisition, magic has become more and more present. And part of that is because Solus has been slowly preparing this ritual for longer than anyone in the Dragon Age universe is really aware of. But also just going into these spaces where magic is.
Now for this part, I think it's cool. I think it's a cool idea that Solus has been like a character who's been like present far beyond, Inquisition. He didn't like wake up like a couple of years like before Inquisition. He was like present for there. So I wonder how true, because like one thing I do think that has to be very stated is that it shouldn't have been more than I think maybe a decade or something like that, because like the way Solus says is like, hey, he used Corypheus because he needed to, he didn't have all of his power, so he couldn't unlock the orb and whatnot. So I don't think I think it gets rid of theories such as he's charlatan, the elven dude who worked alongside Andraste to stop the Tevinter Empire. So I think he's not that, because that's a long time ago. That's like before I think the Second Blight. So I do wonder like the timeline, you know. And also one thing I want to point out is a lot of people for some reason like to say that Dragon Age is a low fantasy setting, which I don't get. Because like even in Dragon Age Origins, right, you kind of just like fight random mages all the time, you know. In Denerim there's this like weird blood mage den that's just full of blood mages, you know. You have like the Mage Collective, which is literally you dealing with mages and stuff. You fight mages, you fight abominations. You sometimes just have random encounters, and one of the enemies is just a mage. In the Haven Village, you fight just mages, you know. Like some of them are just mages, you know. Like I think a shop owner is just a mage, you know. So like it's funny to me is people say like it's a low fantasy setting when it's actually like always been very magical. And I don't think it's like high fantasy setting. It's funny enough, I think it's more of like a medium fantasy setting. Like there is magic, but not that much magic. But I think it's back to the point. I think it's cool that like Solus has been like influencing things behind the scene, which I think is like fine. You know, I don't think it doesn't rewrite too much lore, because that's all it does is like, okay, sure, alright, okay, sure, yeah, okay, sure.
By definition and by the lore, much more present. It's been fun because, again, we do have rules. We want to make sure we're not violating the lore, violating things we said before, but it's also, again, that permissiveness of, okay, what is the most interesting way to do this? What's the most interesting way to tell the story? It's also, honestly, as technology has gotten better, we've been able to show Origins, DA2 on the Eclipse engine. We could talk about this fantastical magic, but the engine didn't really allow us to show it. For the first time, we're really able to let the visuals speak for themselves and not have to tell the player, trust us, it's spectacular, this magic is really cool. We can actually show you and let you drink it in because it is, again, it's a fantastical setting.
Which I think is important. Like, Eclipse engine was, like, I think good for what it needed to do, but there were a lot of things that it could lack. Like mages spells, like the cool big spells like Firestorm, Fireball, and stuff like that were cool in visual, right? But it wasn't always like that. You just kind of had like, okay, cool effect, I guess, you know. It could have been like a lot more magical, right? Because like a lot of the implications for, again, and what we learned from Inquisition is that magic was like literally, magic was like everyone was a mage, right? Which is like, yeah, okay, I mean, cool, you know. I think that implies a lot more of like how
rich history of lore of world building within the IP. So existing players will be familiar with these places and very excited to go to them and explore their mysteries. But for our new players, we're not assuming that you know anything about these locations. And I would say that also extends to the characters. We've taken great care in how we introduce each and every single companion, major story figure within the game as they're introduced.
This crew needs a leader. Someone we can count on. Someone that the world can count on.
I love it. It's just so
Where are we gonna find her?
So for me personally, and I know for the team, it was important that you could see yourself in the game, and that always begins with the character creator. Who you want to be, who you are, or maybe just a completely different character. And that meant supporting all the options, various lineages throughout the history of Dragon Age, and also the various types of identities and people that exist out in the world. I'm really proud of what we...
They don't really mention this, but like, they do mention like a height, well, she does. Like, we can have different body types. I will make the tallest Canary, okay? And another player, I will make the tallest dwarf, okay? Because that's so funny. You have a dwarf so tall, so wide, you know, that's like the size of a human, you know, because I do wonder what the limits are if you can literally have a dwarf the size of a Canary. That'd be very funny, you know. Though one thing I'm concerned with the sort of character creator is when you have like very big expansive character creators, because like Dragon's Dogma 2 comes to mind, that had like a very good character creator. Sometimes I'm concerned with these sort of character creators that while there is a lot of options to like make a good character and make a very different looking character, I am concerned oftentimes of, hey, how easy is it to make a terrible looking character? Because that to me is a very big concern of mine, and why I don't particularly like games like, you know, that have very big extensive character creation stuff, is because it's easier to make a bad looking character than it is to make a good looking character. Sometimes if it's going to be like, hey, here's bad looking character, right? I sometimes just don't want that, you know. If I will sacrifice like huge amount of customization for like a smaller amount to be able to make to have an easier time making a good looking character and whatnot, right? So I will have to see about that.
We built there because it is a game where everyone belongs.
Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age 2 were doing what they could with the technology that they had. Dragon Age Inquisition did a good job of using Frostbite, respected the engine, but this game has been able to execute visually to a degree that just wasn't possible in the past. Everyone moved in exactly the same way. If you put on a suit of armor and you put it on Alistair, you looked exactly the same, standing right beside each other. Now we're able to keep the character coming through in the visuals and the motion, even...
Which I think is very important. And also when like Mark Dara says like respect the engine, this is something you'll have to watch like Mark Dara stuff to sort of understand. But what he basically meant to say is that, or what he means by that is, the best engine for a video game is the engine you ship on. So that does mean by its logical conclusion that yes, Frostbite is a good engine. Because what makes a good engine is being able to actually make a game, because that's the only important part. If you have an engine that does all this cool stuff, but it can never actually ship a game, you will ever actually like send it to audiences and have them play it, then it's useless, it's dumb, it's terrible, right? So that's what's important. And why it's also important is that once you've shipped a game, you understand that engine. The reason why Baldur's Gate 2 was good as it was because Bioware, used and reused and built upon the tools that Baldur's Gate 1 had. Baldur's Gate 2 is a better game because of Baldur's Gate 1, right? Which is why like reusing engines and reusing assets is really good for game developers, because it means that not only can they, make things better, they can also master things. They can improve and iterate,
as you were customizing them, which just wasn't possible in the past.
It's really tough, I must say, in an RPG where you're equipping different types of armor, where you've got different lineages to create that robust experience, but it's something we absolutely wanted to support. And that comes along with a couple of new to Dragon Age features that really push the limits of what we've seen in RPG character creation before. So first of all, full body customization with pretty robust diversity in terms of body shape, body size, proportions, things of that nature. So that was a pretty big evolution for us. We've also invested tremendous effort in our strand hair technology.
Everyone will be confused, okay? This giant, hulking, wide man just like striding above.
Numerous hairstyles, because we know how much our fans care about that. I'm one of them as well. The first thing I always look for.
Okay. I don't particularly get the hairstyle thing because, like, look at my hair, right? It's very basic and simple. I do hope, though, that the hair makes sense within setting, right? Sometimes, all the mods I see people like, yeah, this is, like, what I want from Dragon Age, is, like, fucking Marie Antoinette hair, which is just, like, having a giant ship for a hair, right? And I'm like, okay, like, I don't mind hair options, but I think they should like make sense within setting, like your average Joe, right? How easy do they have access to like good barbers? Like, does barbers exist in Dragon Age? Like I can imagine for like nobles and stuff, they can have very like complicated and very intricate hair designs, right? But like, I don't think like you can have like just like random ass guys with just like the wackiest hairs, because I think that kind of like makes the setting feel less real or like less considered, right? Because like if you just have random people who are like peasants and have like the most stylish hair in existence, right? One, like that's funny, but like two, it could kind of make the setting feel like not as well thought out.
Show me the hairstyles. But the range of hairstyles really matters too. It's not just about quantity. It's making sure that we have diverse representation for all types of players. This is defining how you want to enter the world. So we took a step back and said, how are we going to incorporate things like your background in
one thing, just to mention the hairstyle, one thing that I do sometimes agree on some people is like the half-shaven hair like droop there. Like, I'm sorry, who is shaving their hair? Okay, like, sure, I know razors exist in like Dragon Age, right? And like other fantasy settings, but like, who is doing that, dude, consistently? Like, I do not understand that for like one moment. Like for like a sci-fi setting, it's different, because like for sci-fi, I think it's people have an easier access to like hair care and like hairstyle like stuff and whatnot and knowledge about that. But like, I don't think a fantasy setting like makes sense for it.
Way. How are we going to incorporate things like how you want to experience the gameplay of the game? And all of those are very important factors. I'm particularly proud of integrating, we call it playstyle, but is effectively difficulty into the character creation process. So you can select a number of preset experiences that your character will adopt and step into the game with, but you can also customize that playstyle. So if you're like me and you're terrible at parrying, you can use that up a little bit. Some of the locations that we'll be visiting are bustling cityscapes. We're going to go right to the heart of the Tevinter Empire. We're also going to go to a city in Antiva called Treviso. These have a dense populace, and we knew we needed to have the tools to support a wide range of NPCs. You're not going to find NPCs that look alike in this game. Every NPC is crafted using the same tools that we're giving to our players, with the exception of some of our custom sculpted characters like the companions. So when you walk up to that market vendor in Minrathous, you can make that character. When you see the guards patrolling the street.
Sorry, when I first heard this, my first thoughts were like, you look at that like Minrathous, like merchant or whatever, and then you just like make your character that, and you walk up to him and just like, twin brother, we have missed each other for so long, That is so funny to me, that you can just like any of these random NPCs, look at them, take a screenshot, and just like make a character identical. It'd be so funny, dude.
You can make that character too. I think it's so interesting, not only as a developer to be able to use player-facing tools and technology, but then as a player to.
Oh no, they don't show it. It's when that like lady gets like hit with the, it's that. Oh gosh darn it, dude. Where is it? Oh, this one. it'd be so funny if you make a character identical to her and your character just like off to the side, you know, like like replace this with her, and that'd be like so funny, dude. No. It'd be so funny, dude.
Population around you and be able to go replicate that inside of the character creator.
Where's Nev Gallus? Wasn't she at the meeting point?
No, Tori got to her first. We grabbed her before we arrived and paid off the borrower and to keep it quiet. I'm not surprised. Our detective did something to piss off a cult of murderous blood mages, but their timing stinks.
These are the most fully realized, complex companions we've ever crafted, and I do believe they are our best. They're complicated, they have complicated problems. And what's interesting, as much as I adore the companions and the journeys I've been on with them in past Dragon Age titles, previously it feels like the companions are going on an adventure with me, the main character, whether it's the hero Ferelden or Hawk, you name it. But in Dragon Age the Veilguard, in many ways, the companions are so fleshed out that it feels as though I'm going on a journey with them. I'm exploring.
Okay, so I did talk about this in like my previous video, but like there's a lot of ways you can like think about that, and I don't think her intention is like negative, you know? So I think what she is trying to say is that in a lot of like previous Dragon Age games, characters join you on your adventure rather than like you all going on like the same trajectory, right? Which I don't think that's like a bad thing, because like within story context, you know, it makes sense for like the characters to do that, because like Dragon Age Origins was about you, the warden, like going on, you know, to stop the blight and whatnot, because you know you were like, hey, I'm going to, you know, stop the blight, and then people joined you, you know, on that adventure to stop the blight, right? Which like makes sense for that. Same with like Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition, right? Which I think is more of like a storytelling thing. I think she could have said it better, but I don't think she was like being like terrible about it. I think what this mainly indicates is that all the companions that you're going to get are going to like have already been established, and like Verica's already like met them and like talk to them and said like, hey, we're gonna do this, right? And so like they're all going to the same goal, right? And they're, you know, you're just the leader, you're the guy who's like heading it, right? Which I think is like what is trying to be said here.
How they think and feel. I'm helping them through their problems. We're working through their unique character arcs. They feel like my dear friends, and I absolutely adore them. So outside of combat, what that means is they're going to have their own concerns, fears, distractions, and indeed, even their own sanctuaries, their own personal spaces. In our, I guess you could call it our base of operations this time, our player hub, the lighthouse, each of the companions has their own room. And what I love about it is it becomes a reflection of who they are. The more time you spend with them as the game develops, as you work through their arc, their room and their personalities will evolve and flourish and become more complete as they trust you more and you understand them better. What's interesting, the companions also develop romantically. I'm not just talking about with the main character Rook, I'm talking about with each other. There are moments in the game where two of our companions fell in love with each other, and I had to make some pretty challenging choices as it related to the quest we were on. And it broke my heart. It absolutely did. So I would say, as you're adventuring with them and you're returning to the lighthouse and getting to know them.
I do hope like not every character like gets a romance, you know. I do think like some characters just like being like not going into a romance is like fine, you know.
These decisions and conversations and things you learn about them, it endears them to you in a way that I honestly haven't experienced before. And sometimes that fills me with joy, and sometimes it breaks my heart.
All right, I'll take it from here.
Are you sure?
Positive. You three just keep the demons off me while I talk to him.
Varric, Solus isn't gonna stop just because an old friend asks nicely.
Solus needs someone to sell him another option, to help him justify changing his mind. Come on, Varric. We didn't come all this way just to talk to him. He was my friend.
I think this is a game that tries to give the player as much agency as we can, and then reflecting it back on you. Choice and consequence can be really hard to show, but this is a game about agency, about giving you options, and whether that be in how you play or approach combat, whether that be in how you make your character, whether that be in how you decide who you're going to romance.
So the challenge that's always before us is how do we appeal to each of those sensibilities? The person that's there for the story, the person that is there to min-max their character and do the most damage, the person who really wants to lean into tactical versus the player who really wants to lean into...
Now, I do think there's some, like, maybe a bit of an issue with what they said here, which is I do think that sometimes you can't like appeal to them, right? Like the people who like want to min-max, right? Like sometimes it is just a bit of an issue. Like sometimes it's just this bit of an issue because like, you know, sometimes the game mechanics can't really reflect the min-max nature because, you know, sometimes they're just like things you have to do for story purposes or whatnot, for other purposes, just to like inhibit that. Same with like speedrunners, right? Like some speedrunners, like it's harder to speedrun some other games, not because they're intentionally trying to like, you know, stop speedrunners, you know, because they hate them or whatever, but because sometimes some games lend themselves better to speedruns than others, right? So I wonder if this is mostly just like we try to make in a game that like everyone can like, as a this is like what we normally say during like making a game, or this is more of a hey, we actually trying to do this. I wonder which is which.
to action and fluidity. There are a couple of different axes to our progression systems and how your character will develop over time. There is the gear that you'll find along the way, the things you'll equip. There are the progression systems there within where you're upgrading the gear, you're enchanting it. That extends to your companions, by the way. There's also the robust
and I like that idea. Personally, I prefer like companions having their own like equipment, like own armor and weapons, because to me it means there's a lot more personality and story there than just like me swapping out like the equipment like for whatever, right? You can lose some like customizability and whatnot, but like I think a lot more is gained from like story and character and like meaning, right? So I think the enchanting thing is like a really good way of doing that, because it's cool, you know.
System that we have. This allows you to take any of our 3 classes, the warrior, the rogue, or the mage, specialize them. Each class has 3 different highly distinct specializations, but a skill tree that connects them all together that is easy to use, but also pretty boundless in terms of the gameplay options and styles of character build you can create.
Quickly.
The gameplay in the franchise has been an evolution. Every single entry reimagines what combat is like.
But it does keep that thread that's always been there. When you go from Dragon Age Origins with very tactical combat to Dragon Age 2, which still had pause and play, to Dragon Age Inquisition, again with some tactics, pause and play, but moving towards more action-oriented aspects. In this game,
I don't think they're wrong, but it can feel maybe not misleading, but like how do you say? Like, I don't even think missing with the force with the trees. Because like each of the Dragon Age games do have that sort of like underlying, you do like use some level of tactics, right? Even like Mass Effect to a degree of that. But yeah, like I don't. It's hard to say, but like yeah, I mean I think. Yeah, there's not a lot of ways you can like relate it to like the previous games with like Veilguard's like gameplay.
You have focus on Rook, on your character, but still having that control coming into your combat experience from the other people in your party.
Our goal was to make sure we had a system that allowed players to feel like they actually were able to step into the world of Thetis. They're not a player observing from afar. They are inside of this world. The combat system needs to support that. So that starts with our foundation, which is a real-time combat system. But what I will say is that while it provides a level of accessibility and connection, and indeed weight, one of my favorite things is that every attack, every swing of the sword, when you connect, you absolutely feel it. But that is just the baseline. That allows us to get that level of immersion, that I'm actually in this world, I'm a part of it. But again, the abilities, the strategy, linking my companions' abilities together to perform devastating combos, that is really where the depth and the complexity comes into play. Companions as realized characters. We have to take that premise when we talk about how they show up in combat. These are their own people. They have their own behaviors. They have their own autonomy on the battlefield. They'll pick their own targets. As the plots progress, they'll learn how to use their abilities more competently. And it really feels like you're fighting alongside these realized characters.
No, I don't think what she's saying is like untrue. I do think there will be like a lot of like interesting like tactical like decisions and whatnot, and interesting like ways you can use the combat, you know, in that sort of way. But I do think this, like, for a lot of people who can criticize it, like, but it's not Dragon Age Origins, you know? Which, yeah. Also, I do think it'll be funny to see people like, she likes Dragon Age Origins combat? Huh. Then why'd she make this garbage action game?
In battle. So I love that. I love the believability of it. It feels like we're all in it together. But then when it comes time for the strategy and
so I do think yeah, but like for me, like what I like about a combat system is also like sort of like how believable it is in setting, you know. Now Veilguard kind of has that, but like I do think maybe some of the like moves and sort of, you know, ways characters hit can feel a bit unrealistic, you know. Varric, the wide ass guy, just like doing a backflip, you know, it's very funny, you know.
I might add. That's where really a sense of teamwork comes into play. As the leader of this party as Rook, when I open the ability wheel, I almost feel like we're huddling up, coming up with a game plan together. I see all the abilities that Harding has, and I see everything that Balara is capable of. And sometimes I'm using their abilities synergistically. Maybe I'm slowing time with Balara.
So I do think like some people will be like, but not Origins.
Attacks with Harding, knocking down the enemy, and then me as Rook, I'm rushing in and capitalizing on this setup they've created for me. It is a game about creating this organic sense of teamwork. Now, there are more explicit synergies as well. We very much have intentional combos where your companions can play off of each other. You can queue up abilities between them, and each of those abilities will go off and have their effect, but it results in this massive detonation where you get enhanced effects, debuff the entire battlefield, all because of planning and teamwork. What makes it really cool is you can introduce Rook into that equation as well. One of my favorite things to do is upgrade some of Harding's abilities, so she will autonomously use some of these abilities that normally I'd have to instruct her to do, and she'll actually set my character up to execute a combo that again has that detonation effect. And what's been surprising, I think, for me, is that it's really changed the way I approach the game. I'm very much the pause and play, tactical, strategic RPG player. But what I found is that I entered into kind of a hybrid play style the more familiar I got with this game that we created, where I'm leaning into the fluid, responsive gameplay. I'm using my abilities of Rook, our main character, in real time. But then I am pausing the action when I want to leverage my companions and string together complex combos or synergies that I've identified on my own. It gives you that moment to think and respond in a way that is truly delightful. I came up through...
Which, I mean, I do like personally, like I do like having, like, pause, like, combat in these kind of games, because, like, you know, I'm not particularly great at like reactivity, and stuff. So I like the idea of just like, okay, pause, let me just think if we can spin it, choose some abilities and stuff.
Most of my career as a systems designer, working in progression systems and economy and how all these little virtual characters behave. But I think the thing that surprised me the most has to be just the passion and the culture that the studio has for telling stories for these characters that we've all created together.
I mean, honestly, I just want to say I'm incredibly proud of this project. I'm incredibly proud of this team, and I think the thing I'm most excited about when people start playing this game, people start seeing more about this game, is every little piece, every little thing in this game is because somebody cared. Somebody cared enough to put it in, and you can see that there's a saying that the game reflects the team. I think this one reflects the team that made it in the best possible way.
I'm really excited about this game. It's really been really gratifying to come back onto the team and see everything that they've accomplished in the last couple of years. The game's come together great. It's really fun, and I'm really looking forward to people getting their hands on it in a little while.
So yeah, I think this is a nice sort of making of for Dragon Age Veilguard. It had a lot of cool information, cool interesting lore tidbits and stuff, and also just I think the insights on how the Dragon Age team is making this game is very cool. I do think a lot of them are very happy and excited to make this, especially with the idea that this game was gonna be a live service multiplayer game. And now it's not that anymore. There was going to be microtransactions in this game, but now it's not going to be that anymore. And I think you can see a lot of the development team really happy because of that, And I don't know. A lot of people are a bit skeptical on this game, and that's fine if they don't like it or whatnot. But I'm genuinely very excited, From what I've seen, from the visuals to the even the combat, I do think it looks fun and whatnot. Is really cool, Especially the dialogue, the writing, everything about this game just looks amazing. If I can try to get a shot of Tevinter, that'd be good. Where is it? Wait, it's right there. Yeah, here. This is just so beautiful, dude. It's such an amazing looking game. And I'm just I'm looking forward to it, And yeah, that's it for the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you thought it was cool, perhaps. And yeah, if you liked the video, perhaps consider liking it, maybe even subscribing, and comment down below if you think that, this was a nice documentary, and what do you think about some of these story decisions they're gonna take and whatnot, and what I thought of about it and whatnot. So yeah, I hope you enjoy.